Yeah, so I mean, it's fair to say that, I mean, New Zealand, you kind of took a look at it from a value perspective, right? I mean, the way you looked at your life in the whatever the political economic climate of the U.S. And and decided that wasn't really aligning with your values, you know. And so you look for. I have a lot of people that I talk to that they go through that same process of trying to find the place that aligns more with their values. Could be a different state, could be a different country. But sounds like New Zealand aligned more with your values and what you're looking for in raising a child,
Yeah.
living.
Now, that's not without sacrifice. I mean, I think a lot of people think that this is like looking through rose-colored glasses. The
Mm-hmm.
biggest difference here is that New Zealand is one of the most expensive countries to live in the world.
Right.
So we were lucky enough to buy a house. We scraped and saved for years, and we bought a house near the beach, not on the water. I don't want to be on the water because there are tsunamis here. But
Yeah.
but we got a house. We dropped a lot of money on it, like over $500,000, and this house is 800 square feet.
Wow.
That is
Yeah.
that's where you have to, and look, it's not, it's single glazed windows. We had to put in double glazing windows in half the house just for it to stay warm. There's no wall insulation on the exterior walls, but we live at a beach. So, and we live in a subtropical climate. The houses here are not what you see in America. And so there is a trade-off. There is a
Right.
trade-off. And the other thing too is the price of everything. Gas in this country is equivalent to $8 to $9 a gallon.
Yeah.
And actually,
Yeah.
we're looking at buying our second electric vehicle. We have a Leaf, and right now I'm driving a gas guzzling van. And ever since my son switched schools from daycare to his primary school, I've had to drive him, and my gas bill went through the roof. I'm paying hundreds of dollars a month. And so we're looking at getting a second electric vehicle. So look, there's trade-offs. Like if you're going to come, like I would say, like your listeners are, if you're interested in moving to New Zealand, I feel like we're the extreme example. Not many people move from Delaware to New Zealand, but there are plenty of options in the EU, that are closer, or South America, Central America, Canada. Like, there's all these things you have to consider.
Right. But regardless of where you're going, there's going to be a trade-off to any decision at the end of the day,
Absolutely.
and that's what you're weighing, and that goes back to that. I forget the term. What was it? The analysis paralysis.
Yeah, you can analyze it to death and then never do it.
Right.
Right.
I'm bad about that. I'm like trained like through my job to analyze things to death. So
Yeah, you're a tax
yeah.
preparer. Yes, you're yep. You got to analyze every little bit. Yep. My husband's the same way. And that's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. Because you think about things that maybe someone like me didn't think about.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I guess the big trade-off in New Zealand's case is lifestyle for cost of living, and that's true in I love beach towns, basically anywhere in the world, but they're always expensive.
Yeah.
That's the big trade-off.
So I heard a really good quote recently that when I do the second edition of my book, I'm going to put it in. I will credit her, but I saw an American on the New Zealand Facebook group. So it's Americans in New Zealand, or Americans living in New Zealand Facebook groups. There's several of them. And one woman said, I'm going to get this right. She said, in New Zealand compared to America, I'm going to get it wrong. She said, sorry, I'm like blanking. I need to have it in front of me. The quality of life is lower, but the lifestyle is better.
The quality of life,
is lower than in America, because I live in a house that cost over $500,000, and it's like a double wide trailer. That's the quality of life is like lower. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's just our cars aren't as nice, our roads aren't as nice. We don't have Amazon dropping stuff off to us an hour after we order it. Groceries are expensive. Gas is astronomically expensive. like just everything's expensive. You know,
Right.
but the lifestyle is better.
Right.
We have cleaner air. We have cleaner water. I can swim in streams here and not get poisoned by forever chemicals.
Hmm.
We have healthcare. We don't have to worry about it. We have, pretty progressive laws that protect kids and women and the elderly. Um, we have actually still like government pensions. Like there are things that like make life here better, but like day to day, it's harder. But you have to
Hmm.
just like sacrifice a lot. Now, I will tell you, we've recently experienced um, a net migration loss.
Okay.
A lot of Kiwis, so a lot of Kiwi citizens can go to Australia because we're actually technically part of Australia. No Kiwi wants to admit that, but we are. Um, when you're a citizen of New Zealand, you can go to Australia with no visa and just start working right away.
Okay.
And a lot of Kiwis are leaving. We had a net migration loss of like 150,000 in the last 6 months. It's not good. We're having a brain
And
drain
that's mostly, I was going to say, is that mostly a job opportunity issue and
and
cost of
sal
living? Maybe?
and cost of living and salaries. And
I mean,
also New Zealand.
Australia's not cheap either. I mean, at least Sydney. I don't know, but
All, I mean, it's expensive to live in those cities, but there are other places that you can live that.
right.
The thing is, it's actually on par with Auckland, but your grocery bills are lower and you get paid a much higher salary. Um,
Okay.
and a lot of that has to do with New Zealand has engineered a recession on purpose because when when inflation hit America, I actually people are going to hate me for saying this. Yes, things are expensive in America, but like I almost feel like you're finally paying for things at the right amount in America, but now we need wages to catch up. Now, you can fight me on that. A lot of people will say that's not true. In New
Yeah.
Zealand, we had already been paying those high prices, and now on inflation was on top of that.
Right.
And it just got so out of
The
hand
waiting.
that they actually had to jack up the interest rates to like 8%. And that affects people's mortgages. And I won't get into that, but basically, we don't have 30-year fixed mortgages. Our mortgages refix every couple of years. So I saw my
Okay.
mortgage payment go straight through the roof, and now it's starting to creep back down. It was like 2 years of real pain. And the New Zealanders were like, that's it. We're going to Australia. This is ridiculous because Australia didn't have the same interest rates and they're not in an engineered recession. So you need
Right.
I'm not saying it's all honky dory over here.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. No. Yeah. It makes sense. Well, yeah. So on the banking side, I like to talk about that for a little bit,
oh,
just to understand that process. I mean, I guess I guess first thing, just because since we're kind of on the real estate, what is that loan process like? Like getting a loan. I mean, you mentioned that they only have variable interest rate loans, I guess. But
no, let me
how does
back
that?
up. Well, let me back up by saying actually a couple things. Number one, I'm not a banking expert. I say this through my book. I am not an expert. I put that disclaimer in everywhere. The other thing I want to
These
mention,
are practical, real.
practical. Yeah, yeah,
Right.
real everyday stuff. Yeah. Talk to your
Right.
financial advisor first. But the other thing I want to say is I want to back up a little bit. My book is not a licensed immigration advice book. I am not a licensed immigration advisor, so legally I cannot tell people how to get into this country. You can do that on your own, or you can
Mhm.
hire a licensed immigration advisor or lawyer to do it with you. But I just want to clarify that. Do not pick up my book for like tips on like how to do your visa application. I'm not allowed to say anything about that. This is more day
Right.
to day
Yeah.
living as
I
an
would
American.
I would describe it. I would describe it as an anecdotal, advice template.
Yeah,
This is a real person's move to New Zealand and the
yeah,
things you went through and the tips that you
yeah,
would provide. Yeah, it's
totally.
not legal advice for sure.
Now let's talk about the housing. So, first of all, if you're an American moving here, I don't think you're legally allowed to buy a house until you've been in this country for a couple years. We used to have a big
Yeah,
problem.
buy a house or get a loan.
You can't
Buy a
do
house.
either, or you can't do
Okay.
either. You can get a
Okay.
car loan. Like, I mean, you can get like a personal loan for a car because everybody might need a car loan to get a car
Right.
here, unless you have the money outright. Um,
Got
but to buy property here as an American, you have to be here for a certain number of years, and I think you have to have at least residency visa.
Okay.
And that's because we had a big problem in 2014 and 15 with speculative buyers from China, mostly, and also some other people around the world just buying properties in Auckland and in other parts of the country like Queenstown, sight unseen, and just like calling during auctions and like jacking the prices up of like houses to like
Yeah.
millions of dollars above what they were actually worth, and it completely screwed over like everyone because no one, like normal Kiwis living here, couldn't afford it. When Jacinda Ardern got into office, the Labor Department, sorry, not the Labor Department, the Labor Party of the government, they clamped down on that and said if you're not a resident living here for a certain number of years, you can't buy a house. And it did cool the market a bit, but then COVID happened and it all just went crazy again. But
Right.
that's why. So if you're an American, let's say you move here for several years, you love it, you're like, yeah, I want to live here and buy a house here. I actually have a friend of mine who has been living here for several years. She's a nurse. She moved during the pandemic to be here with her 3 kids, and they just bought their first house. So I'm very happy for her. So mortgages are not fixed. And a lot of Americans, that scares them. And yeah, it should a bit. You have a 30-year mortgage, but your mortgage rate refixes depending on how long you made that mortgage for. And it's actually super easy. Like I had a house in the States and the paperwork I had to fill out and try to understand was like mind-boggling. I manage my mortgage on an app here. Like, and I can change whenever I want how much more I want to pay. But maybe we're having a rough month and I don't get as many music gigs or something, or I've been sick and I can't teach. I can actually reduce a little bit how much I pay for week to week. They let me do that. And so we chose a 2-year fixed mortgage, and it's just about to renew in November. But a lot of people, when they didn't, you don't have a crystal ball. So people were like, oh, well, I bought my house in 2020 at 2.5% interest. That's so low. But then when inflation went crazy and they jacked up the interest rates overall, in 2 years, if you had fixed your mortgage at 2 years here, you went from like a 2.5% interest rate, which is what we were at, right up to 7.5%. And you were stuck at that until, again, it cycles over. Now, I saw what was going on in 2022, and I went, okay, we're going to fix for 2 years, and we're going to get the best rate we can. And the best rate we could get was 5.5. We went from 2.5 to 5.5, and I was like, okay, time to take on more students. Time to take on more students and pay and play more gigs and no more dinners out. Like that's just what you have to do. And then now we're looking at they finally cut interest rates for the first time since 2020 or 2021. So now we're creeping down, and I'm hoping that I won't have to pay more than 5.5 when I refix in November. That is the biggest thing Americans are scared of. Now, I used to own a house in America, and I paid 5.5% for. I was stuck at that for 30 years, but I had a split mortgage where the 20% mortgage was stuck at 10.5%, and we bought 9 months before the GFC. Our house was underwater, and the banks would not let us refinance at lower rates, even after the interest rates had gone down. Because remember, after the GFC, interest rates are like around the 5-ish mark, 5-6% mark, and then when the GFC happened, what did they do? They lowered interest rates to try to stimulate the economy. I didn't benefit from that interest rate lowering because my banks had basically held me and my husband over a barrel. Why would they refinance us? It was unfair. It was so unfair. And I remember that. And when Kiwis complain about the fact that, oh, I'm stuck at this interest rate for 2 years and I'm mad, I'm like, yeah, well, at least you can change it in a couple of years. You're going with the market here. You can go with the market. Oh my gosh. Like we tried to refinance multiple times and the banks were like, no, 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 no. One time they were like, oh, no, you're self-employed, but you don't have a you don't have a business certificate, like a business license to operate in Maryland,
Right.
I'm just like a kid's music teacher. Like, do I really need a business license for that? Yeah, so we're not going to approve you for your refinance because of that. I'm like, I'll give you all my tax paperwork. They're like, no. So it's just there's a fairness,
Yeah, the
differential.
bureaucracy can be very tough in the US for
Yeah.
sure. And the mortgage paperwork. So you're saying as far as like the process of getting the loan and the mortgage, that was a little bit smoother overall than you would
There's a
say in
couple
Europe.
things. A couple things. Number one, there's actually no buyer's real estate agents here.
Uh-huh.
You can pay outright someone to kind of be your eyes and ears, but
Uh-huh.
basically I was just like tracking all of the home listings myself, and it took me 4 months to find a house that was suitable enough for us and in our price range. So right
Yeah.
there, that was tricky. You can basically, the process is, if you were to buy a house, the first thing I recommend that you do is go to a mortgage broker. They're free,
Uh-huh.
and they will pre-qualify you with a couple banks for how much you think up to how much you can afford based on your income and everything. So that's what
Yeah.
we did. We got pre-qualified, which I know they do in America too, and that gives you a 3-month window to find something.
Okay.
And that was helpful to us. So we were like, okay, we know how much we can afford now, and this is how much our repayments would be if we got a house for this much money. Then I found a lawyer. And that actually, you would think that the lawyer is the opposite. Like, next in America, you would go find a real estate agent to like show you around. They don't have those here.
Yeah.
They don't have buyer's agents. So unless you pay for them. So we
Right.
I found a lawyer. Then I did all of the work up front, and I didn't have to pay her. She gets paid when we settle. So,
Uh-huh.
and so I was careful about how much time I was taking of hers. And so whenever I found one place, we didn't end up buying it, but I sent her the paperwork, and it was an apartment, and she found some problems with the body corp and some issues with like the certificate of compliance on the building. And she goes, you cannot live here. It's not safe. Like, you're going to end up blowing tens of thousands of dollars to fix their leaky basement if you buy this place. And I was like, oh, thank you for catching that. Okay, won't buy that. Found this
Right.
house. She looked over all the paperwork, and then she said, okay, everything's good. She handled all the paperwork for us, found a couple hiccups, fixed them for us. And then we went to settlement with the with the seller's agent
Agent.
and with
Mhm.
our lawyer. And then there was a lot of midnight emailing between, our mortgage broker, making sure the bank would approve us for this amount, and like the lawyer. It was very much a DIY, and I'm very proud of myself. I feel like I did a lot of adulting those 4
Yeah.
months.
It's-
it was intense, but I
Yeah.
had also bought a house pre GFC in the States, and that was also intense, and we got screwed over by our mortgage broker. Like, so
Mhm.
I've seen both sides of this, and I'm not saying that it's better here, but I just feel like, I've heard of bad things happening in this country, people buying houses that actually ended up having secret issues that you know, that the seller's agent knew about and didn't divulge. Like, you need to get like
Uh-huh.
a pretty ironclad home inspection here.
Right.
So
Yeah. Yeah, it makes
that was a
sense. I
lot of
mean,
information, but it's a big topic.
yeah, I mean, and I'd say to break it down, I mean, mortgage broker, figure out how much you can obviously get a house for. If you
Yeah.
want to get your own agent, you can. You're going to pay them a fee,
Mhm.
which is kind of the direction the U.S. is going now with the recent Supreme Court case that I don't fully
I
understand.
saw that. I have no clue what's going to happen, but that's very
Yeah,
fascinating to us.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So we'll see, but yeah, and then get a lawyer. I mean,
Yeah.
especially you want to get the paperwork correct. So
Oh,
so
I wouldn't do it yourself for sure.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, cool. So I mean, staying on banking, um, your favorite five-letter word is probably FATCA at this point, right?
Oh,
Mm.
yes, my favorite 5-letter word.
I don't know, acronym, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I'll give a brief background of FATCA just so people know what we're talking about. But I mean, FATCA is the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, or foreign, I forget exactly what it stands for. But But basically, back in 2000 to 2013, the way I explain it to people is it's basically the IRS forcing their hand and blackmailing the rest of the banks around the world to say, hey,
Yeah.
you have to tell us all your US account holder, or we are going to withhold taxes on any payments back to your banks. And the US, being the banking capital of the world, has that power over those banks. And so they can choose, basically, they're choosing between doing business with the US or, you know, handing over their US account holders. So most countries at this point that I know of are all on board with FATCA, and that has a huge impact on Americans going abroad because it adds a lot of stipulations. So, and in a lot of cases, people can't get bank accounts. There's certainly things you have to file in your taxes that I deal with that kind of increases some complexity and cost of doing your U.S. tax returns. But I'm curious. I'm always curious to hear from a practical perspective. Like, I hear about people saying they get turned away from banks. Did you actually have that experience, or what does that actually look like? Is it like a piece of paper that says, "Are you a U.S. citizen?" Turn around and walk out the door, or is it like, are they,
Ooh.
or like, is it a conversation that they're having? So I'm just kind of curious in New Zealand if you had that experience, or if you've heard any stories from a FATCA perspective.
I want to be careful about how I talk about this. I think that, well, I came in end of 2013 and beginning of 2014, and I think that was right around the time FATCA got initiated.
Yeah, it was 2013. I'm pretty sure is when it.
Yeah, so actually, like when we went to sign up for our bank accounts, like they didn't ask us for anything. They were like,
Okay.
"Are you living here and do you have visas?" And we were like, "Yes." And they're like, "Do you have a job? Because we need to make sure that they can pay you into your bank account." My husband was like, "Yeah, I got a job." And we're like, "Great. Okay, here's the paperwork." Now it's changed. I cannot personally talk about how it's changed um on the New Zealand side because I haven't opened a bank account here. I mean, I got a mortgage.
Right.
So we actually had to open a bank account because we needed to open like a checking and a savings account for the mortgage lender, because then we just put money in that bank account, like in that savings account, and then it goes to pay off our mortgage loan. And they didn't ask us for anything there either. Like,
Okay.
so,
Yeah.
but I will tell you that at the time we were permanent residents of New Zealand, and then we became soon after that citizens. So it could be that because we weren't on visas, it didn't matter. They didn't care
Right.
because we were technically Kiwis at the time, and we are now. What I can
Right.
tell you is, no, what I can tell you though is that, like, I've heard through the grapevine Americans having trouble, but I've actually heard more problems, and I have personally had more problems as an American living abroad with the U.S. banking system.
Right.
It has
Yep.
been a
Different but
nightmare.
similar issue. Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't want to go into all the problems I've had because I'm going to I could go on for days about just how angry I am and how many times we have been screwed over as second class citizens. I'm still a citizen of the United States, and I still file my taxes because I have to, and I have to I have to adhere to all banking laws. Um, but like, I don't understand. I don't know what it is, man. So basically, like, if you are a United States citizen and you're going to move abroad, I'm not advocating that you break any laws and you break any rules. Just don't change your address.
Right.
Don't change your address to overseas. In my opinion, I'm just here for an extended vacation. This has repercussions for IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, savings accounts, everything. I just be careful what you do. Is I'm not advocating for breaking any laws, but I don't think there is a law saying that you can't live abroad
Well,
while
that's what I
having a
was
bank
going to say.
account.
Yeah, I mean, and I do this for a living and talk to a lot of people in the same situation, and there is no rule. So, like, I talk to people. It could be Charles Schwab, and I have 20 clients that bank with Charles Schwab or have IRAs with them. They live all over the world, and two of them get their IRAs closed down. It's not a rule from Charles Schwab says they have to. It's, as far as I can tell, and maybe somebody can clarify. I've asked a lot of people at this point. Nobody can clarify this, but it's the decision of that particular branch. And I think that the particular person in charge at that branch, because
Yeah.
I assume there's additional paperwork or something like that. The same reason they
Yeah.
turn Americans away from a FATCA perspective. They just don't want to deal with it.
Right.
And that's what happens a lot with the U.S. owned people putting with a foreign address at a U.S. bank. There's some additional paperwork that goes into it, and a lot of times they'll just drop them. And
Yeah.
yes,
That's
I
right.
mean, my suggestion. You had some good advice in your book about this. There's I always forget the acronym, but the SDFSU, State Federal Bank, something like that.
State Department Federal Credit Union. So the State Department
Right.
Federal Credit Union existed already for people who worked for the State Department, and people who worked in federal government overseas. So people like, like civil servants who worked for the ambassadors, they go overseas and they're doing diplomacy, or like they're sent overseas for national security reasons, or, things like that. And those
Right.
Americans work for the government, and they created this credit union for them. Then what happened was the American Citizens Abroad
Yeah.
nonprofit organization, the ACA, coupled with the State Department Federal Credit Union a few years ago to open up opportunities for banking and IRAs to American citizens living abroad who did not work for the government, or just normal people. And when
Mhm.
I found this out, I was like, yay, like this is great. Now I have to say something. I have been going through their website. I've been going through their IRA opening process. I've been going through trying to tie my external bank account to my State Department Federal Union account so that I can like send money, with a cross bank transfer, like all those
Yeah.
things. And it's kind of antiquated.
Okay.
It's run by the federal government. So I would say that they're not the most cutting edge credit
Yeah.
union or bank, if ever I had to deal with. I mean, but what I will tell you is that when I call them, they're very nice, and I
Yeah.
get a human, and even if they don't give me the answer right away, I can at least email them. Um, it was a long drawn out
It's a good
process.
option.
It's a good
Yeah.
option, and you can have an IRA, and thanks to you, Alex, you helped us with figuring out, like, we have to file foreign tax credit on our taxes, not foreign earned income exclusion, in order to put money toward an IRA. Is that correct?
Right. You have to have earned income. And so if you
Right.
take the exclusion and it wipes out your earned income, you can no longer contribute to the
Right.
IRA. So
Right.
yeah, that's
And
definitely
this is
something.
why, and this is why y'all need a tax accountant like Alex and expat tax professionals, because it's like so important. Like, because if you get it wrong, you can really get it wrong. I want to mention one other thing about pseudo banking in New Zealand. I mentioned this um, in the book, and I know you have talked about it with lots of your clients. Kiwi Saver is not great for Americans.
Uh-huh.
I
Yeah.
would be very careful about Kiwi Saver if you move to New Zealand, or if you're already in New Zealand watching this. Americans, listen to me. If you're in New Zealand and you're watching this and you have a Kiwi Saver, you need to figure that out. You need to really look at that. That is like a minefield.
Yeah. I would say that, I mean, there's a lot to say that's unfair about, at least as far as the tax system goes, with Americans outside the US. But the retirement and investment options available for expats is extremely unfair to
I would
expats
agree with
outside.
you.
And in particular, I mean, Kiwi Savers, but you have the same version of the same thing. The Kiwi Savers similar to the IRA or 401k in the US, and every country has something similar, but it doesn't fit neatly into the IRS box of a pension.
Mhm.
And there's been enough noise about this, which is a good thing and actually shows how big of a problem it is, that the IRS proposed regulations a couple months ago with foreign trusts to ease the foreign trust reporting, because that's the problem at the end of the day, is that these, like a Kiwi Saver or a foreign retirement account, is a trust technically from a legal perspective, but it's not a 401k because 401k is a specific code section in the with the IRS. So the Kiwi Saver turns into a trust, and then it's what kind of trust it is, and you have all kinds of additional reporting requirements and things that can happen. But they proposed regs to say basically try and clarify the rules with what is a foreign trust and what is not, and what type of retirement accounts have to file these additional forms. The proposed regs make it more complicated. They did the opposite of what they wanted to do.
Always.
But I mean, there has been in within about 2 weeks, there were almost 2,000 comments that were sent to the IRS from taxpayers all over the world, basically just crushing the IRS for how terrible the system is, because it keeps people from, I mean, like you or somebody living in New Zealand, like you're in New Zealand and your options for investment are as a New Zealand resident. You know, you should be available. You should be able to take advantage of those systems that are available there, and you're not able to. And then you get cut out of the US systems unless you find the right bank or whatever. So it's just, yeah, it's tricky. There are solutions out there, but it's, you know, it's complex to navigate. I'll just say, and
Yeah.
it's always a weight between the cost of complying with the rules and the benefit of the investment strategy. And so,
Right.
yeah,
It depends on your personal, like we looked at doing KiwiSaver and doing the compliance and the paperwork and all that. And at the end of the day, my husband and I just don't make enough money to warrant it. So we opted out of KiwiSaver before we even got it. And that actually saved us. But I cannot say the same for other Americans who had no clue when they got a job that when they were offered KiwiSaver that they should have done their own homework and decided whether or not they wanted to do it. They just said yes. And then I know a couple Americans opened it for their kids. And like they're on the hook for thousands of dollars of compliance filing a year because they have to do it through an accountant. And it's like, wow, like, but you know, there are options for retirement on the US side now with the State Department of Federal Credit Union and their IRAs. You just got to make sure again that you're filing foreign tax credit. And that, you
and there's
know,
other options too.
there's other
they're
options. Yeah.
like, because I work with multiple investment advisors that specifically do that work, and I've met some because I've been intentionally trying to find these people to help to give people options from an expat perspective. And so there's options out there, but if you just go to your random Charles Schwab account or TD Ameritrade or something, you run the risk, especially if you get a foreign address on there. There's a good chance you're going to get dropped or not let in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. It's absolutely true. And you got to do your homework. And you know, if you pick up my book, I go into some of this stuff like on the surface um just to try to like warn people. Another thing that's really big on the tax side is a lot of self-employed people in New Zealand. If you're a sole trader, which means it's basically a sole proprietor, you still have to pay 15% Social Security tax. I met a girl who had been running her own business as a sole trader for like almost 10 years here, and I broke that news to her at an American's dinner. And she looked like she had seen a ghost. She was like, "Wait a minute, I've had to file my taxes the whole time?" Yeah.
Right.
And I owe 15% Social Security tax? Yeah. And I was like, yeah, you need to call an expat accountant stat. Like you need to do it now because and
Yeah.
she had to do the streamline process. You just don't know what you don't know. And this pertains to whether or not you live in New Zealand or some other country as an expat.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, on the self-employment side, I mean, I'd say the three main things I see from a tax perspective is the Kiwi Savers, you know, triggering additional tax reporting requirements. And then self-employment or starting your own business. You know, in the US, it's just a given. You start a business, you open an LLC, and that's what you do. And it's like that in most countries, honestly. There's a benefit to doing your business through a legal entity in the foreign country, but that creates US tax issues that you have to work through. And then, you know, generally when you're paid, you can eliminate, especially in a country like New Zealand where your taxes are generally higher than they would be in the US. You shouldn't logically be paying any additional US tax because you get a credit for that. But like you said, with the self-employment tax, it operates in its own world. So even if you're able to exclude all of your income from an income tax perspective in the US, self-employment tax operates differently. And there's things like it's called a totalization agreement
Yeah.
out there. And I think I always forget the number, but I think there's like 15 or 16 countries that the U.S. has totalization agreements with, which solves that problem. But New Zealand, unfortunately, isn't one of them.
Nope.
So,
It's not one of them.
so yeah, I mean, it's a good point. If you're don't just because logically you're thinking I have the foreign earned income exclusion or I can take a foreign tax credit, I'm not going to pay any taxes in the U.S. Not true if you're self-employed, and there's
Yeah. And
yeah
this
some ways
comes
to work.
up and this comes up more often than you think for like people who you wouldn't think of as entrepreneurs. For instance, I have a friend who works in the medical field, and she's been asked to do once a week for some pediatric work because they're really short staffed, and she's qualified, and they say, okay. And she goes, what do I need to do for taxes? And I said, US taxes. And I said, well, are they paying you in full? And then you have to pay the IRD your tax, or are they setting you up in their like in their payroll system and they're paying the IRD, which is the New Zealand version of the IRS? Are they paying
Right.
the IRD your taxes? If they do the former, which is they're paying you in full, you're an entrepreneur at that point. Now you owe 15% of Social Security tax. And she's like, oh, I don't know if they're
Mhm.
withholding my New Zealand taxes. I said, you need to become a contractor. Go ask them to withhold your taxes for New Zealand, and then you do a much easier form for America, and you don't have to pay the
Right.
Social Security tax. I said, be careful. She doesn't see herself as an entrepreneur, but she could have accidentally become one just by accident.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just another thing. It's another. I mean, if you want to call it a trade-off, at the end of the day, I mean, when you move to another country as an expat, especially if you're an American, you know, taxes, banking, immigration, these are all things that are going to be new to you because it's a totally different way of looking at it and there's going to be new rules. And so, you know, back to the cost or the time, if you're going to try and do things yourself, yeah, you just have to be aware that, that you need to be prepared for these sort of changes and get the right advice at the end of the day. And,
Yeah.
and don't just jump into it without without being prepared because
Yeah.
it can come back to bite you. But yeah,
Yeah.
if you're prepared and you're moving for the right reasons to a
Yeah.
place, I mean, New Zealand sounds pretty awesome, and I would love
Yeah.
to come visit there someday.
Come
I
visit
went
me
to
anytime.
Australia. I went to
Yeah.
Australia a long time ago. I was 12 years old. My parents, my,
Okay.
my uncle was actually Australian, and
Oh.
we went to Sydney. It was for the 2000. It was year 2000 for the Olympics. We weren't
Oh,
actually there
cool.
for the Olympics, but we were there kind of when they were getting ready for it. So it was, I don't know, it's pretty cool. But yeah, I'd love to come back to that part of the world one day. New Zealand
Come
sounds
by
awesome.
anytime. We're like Australia, but with all the things that can't kill you, like snakes,
Right.
spiders, white sharks. We're starting to get a couple, of the great white sharks, but they're not that many. We don't
Yeah.
have oppressive
Australia
heat.
has a
Like,
crazy amount of scary animals for sure and insects.
yeah, I'm not interested at all. Like, I
Yeah.
haven't been to Australia yet, and I've been living a 3-hour flight from it for the last 10 years. I want to go. I have friends that live over there, so we could go over there and visit. I have a friend
Yeah.
who just went, and I said, did you see anything scary? She's like, I was just walking down the street, and there were just bats. Huge, humongous bats over my head. And I'm like, oh, God, no, thank you.
Right. Right. Yeah. Not my
Like,
favorite of animals.
it's like at first she thought it was a seagull, and then she looked up and screamed. It's like, oh, okay.
That's
But yeah, but as far as like doing your homework and like you said, being prepared, there are a lot of really good resources out there. First of all, like this podcast is great, like, and other podcasts like it.
Mhm.
Reddit has a lot of really great threads. There's also a lot of really good Facebook groups, like, there's this really good group called Two Fat Expats. I don't know why they call themselves that, like, but it's
Yeah,
and
I
it's
think they have a podcast too.
they have
I've
I
seen
think they
that.
started as a
Yeah.
podcast, and then they added on a Facebook group where you can like ask questions, and you can use the
Okay.
search what's really good about these groups is you can use a search function, just a little like magnifying glass icon, to
Mhm.
just search keywords. So if you're curious about Kiwi Saver, just go into any of these Facebook groups and just type in Kiwi Saver, or type in like self-employment tax or social security, or you just use that search function, and then you don't have to ask the question again because it's probably already been asked. You want to make
Uh-huh.
sure that it's timely. Like, you don't want to take a post from like 2015 because the laws may have
Right.
changed. But, and you can talk to people. So I find that to be very, very helpful, as well as the reason why I wrote my book, because I feel it's a very specific need, like
Mhm.
for at least my
Yeah.
country. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, hey, this has been extremely valuable information. I've enjoyed
Yeah.
it. I've learned a lot. I would
Yeah, it was
say,
great. Thank you.
if you could, this is always a hard question to answer, and I always feel bad kind of putting it on people, but it's
Okay.
interesting to hear. If you could give one piece of advice to someone looking to move to New Zealand, is there one thing that sticks out to you that
Buy
maybe
my book.
surprised you?
Buy my book. No, just kidding. Just kidding. One piece of advice for someone who's interested in moving to New Zealand.
Yeah.
Ugh. Um, it's like a two-pronged. Try to visit
Yeah.
first. Try to visit
Yeah.
first.
What
It,
about culturally? Maybe if we say culturally, what was the surprising thing culturally? Because we didn't really talk about that. You
oh,
know,
tall poppy syndrome.
yeah.
I go into this in my book toward the end of the book. Tall poppy syndrome is a phenomenon that doesn't just exist in New Zealand, but it exists here, the UK, a bit in Australia, Ireland. It's a Britishism kind. It's a British kind of thing, because we are still part of the Commonwealth, like the Crown. Like, we're still part of England and Britain, Great Britain,
Yeah.
which a lot of people don't know. So it is tall poppy syndrome is like the Americans' kryptonite. Okay. And so what it is there is this tall poppy. So think of a field of poppies. They're all
Mhm.
uniform in height, right? So think of like that famous scene from Wizard of Oz.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's just a field of poppies, and all of them are the same height. And then if there's one tall poppy, you can see it more.
Yeah.
And tall poppy syndrome is a real phenomenon that has been studied in sociology, where they cut you down to size. Now, the reason why that is because the UK, Australia, New Zealand, like all of these like different places that are part of the British Crown are very egalitarian. We have universal health care for everyone. We believe more in fairness. We believe more in, like, rather than pull up yourself by your bootstraps and work your ass off and work 80 hours a week, we prioritize work-life balance. So, like, I'm going to work hard, but ask me for too much and that's going to cut into my fishing time. I'm not going to do it. Don't ask
Yeah.
me, okay? Like, I go to the beach, okay? Like, this kind of like concept of like everybody is treated fairly, everybody gets all this. But the minute that you as an American come in and say, I can do this better, or hey, look at me, I'm awesome, um, it it ends up like you will actually be told off in person.
Uh-huh.
Or you'll be cut out of circles and blacklisted. In a country of 5 million people, that is death to your career. Like,
Yeah.
it's too small. People know everybody else. Like, Jacinda Ardern, the former prime minister, I'm like 1 degree of separation from her. Like everybody, like, I know her kid, like I know her nieces. Like, it's like, doesn't work like that here. So what does that mean? You just got to be careful when you get here. Americans have this American exceptionalism baked into our psyche. America's the best, and everything we do is the best. And yeah, okay, sure, we landed on the moon and we conquered the Nazis, but look, y'all haven't even figured out how to offer maternity leave. Like, y'all need to, like, just take yourselves down a notch and maybe listen more than talk. It's taken me a
Uh-huh.
long time to assimilate in this country, and my Americanness comes out more around my American friends, who I have the majority of my friends here are American. When I'm around
Uh-huh.
Kiwis, I turn into a completely different person. I'm quieter. I listen more. I don't pat myself on the back. I don't even pat others on the back. It's weird. It's like if you give too many accolades to people, they think that you're tall poppying the other person. It's weird. It's just like we it's now, I'm not saying that across the board, because you can stereotype and you can like
Right.
generalize, so I don't want to do that, but I have seen Americans here do that, and it can harm you, but it also harms Kiwis. Lorde. So, Lorde, the singer, she's from Auckland. She's a Kiwi.
Uh-huh.
And she, won Grammys and got uber famous. And then when she got back here to stay with her family and after her world tour, people started shitting all over her. Part of it's
Yeah.
sexism, part of it's, ageism because she was young. But there was, I don't know, like New Zealand in a way, they celebrated her for a while and then they a little bit turned on her. And that's just because she exuded this I'm hot stuff kind of
I
thing.
see.
But she, I don't think that she was I don't think that she was drinking her own Kool-Aid. I don't think that she
Mhm.
thought that she was amazing. But at the same time, girl, you worked your butt off to get where you are, so you should be proud of yourself. And that's sort of a cultural difference that I think Americans do not understand.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I mean be humble, right? Be humble and recognize that it's not going to be America or
Yeah.
maybe that you're not exceptional.
Well, I
Be
think I
humble in
think
what sense?
again, yeah, and look, my husband works for a company that was started by Kiwis that has the CEO as a Kiwi, that has a lot of Kiwis working for it.
Mhm.
But they also have a lot of immigrants working for it. So it just depends on where you work and where you live. But, I would say the sooner you can assimilate, the better. Like they say, when in Rome. If you're here and you complain about how you can't get a decent iced coffee, because you can't. I'm just clarifying,
Right.
you cannot get a decent iced coffee here. Don't complain. You're in New Zealand. Just,
Right.
go have a flat white and be happy with it. I don't know. But at the same time, I will say I'm a go-getter. I'm a type A personality. I'm a go-getter and I'm an entrepreneur. I work hard. I have an American work ethic in me. And I will tell you that there is a reason why I am one of the longest tenure music teachers at my private music school. It's because I stick it out and they value the fact that I work and go the extra mile. So I wouldn't say that they're cutting me down.
Right.
Because they love my work ethic. So Americans have that to bring. You just got to be careful that it doesn't seem like um,
Mm.
you're
Like
you think you're all that while doing it. You're patronizing. You don't want to be patronizing while doing it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think that advice goes for anywhere, probably most countries in the world. But
Mm,
islands, smaller places, it probably amplifies for sure.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, awesome. Well, hey, it was great talking to you, Melissa, and
Thank
yeah,
you.
hope we can do it again. We only touched on a few small parts of this book actually in an
Uh,
hour and a half. So there's a lot more to talk about that you have to say with New Zealand. So maybe we'll have you back on
oh,
to
that would
dig
be
into
great.
the specific New Zealand stuff. But
Yeah,
yeah, all right.
absolutely. And yeah, come
All
visit
right,
me
great.
anytime and bring your family. We have hobbits here. We'll show them to you.
All
Thank
right,
you.
awesome.